Hi, Dr. Wright and Dr. Wright's class. This is my video response for week number 6. Last week we read 4 different articles about evaluating digital humanities scholarship and also about evaluating some sort of standard for digital humanities practices within different departments and institutions. So the first question that Dr. Wright introduced was how do different ideas impact the guidelines of these institutions? Like, how do the different ideas of a definition of what digital humanities is impact the guidelines of these institutions? And if people make different guidelines based on different definitions of digital humanities, can there ever be any kind of universal guideline? The question is interesting. Before I knew that we had to do our essay off of our own set of guidelines, I was going to actually write about this. Different definitions of digital humanities branch off into talking more about the humanities side or about the digital side of the project, and a lot of the definitions blend the two. So when it comes to criteria and guidelines for this type of work, they specify qualities that both the humanistic inquiry has to do with the project and also the digital interface part. So whichever is valued more usually have more specification on what institutions require as quality work. Sophia asked a question, and she asked, what are senior colleagues confused about your earlier article that we read in class, Dr. Wright? And you said that they were kind of confused on how to evaluate it because it was co-written and it wasn't necessarily based on archival research. It was instead secondary research that was flipped to be primary research because you took on from many different sources. And it was also open review, which is more common in digital humanities rather than traditional double-blind review. And it made me ask the question, how does the review process determine tenure? How do the people in charge read a project and then determine its validity and then give credit by giving funding to these different projects, like further funding for these different projects? Are they paid for after they're done, or are they paid for before they are completed? Those questions were in my mind. The second question that Dr. Wright brought up in class was, one key guideline in NINES is in the promotion to tenure for assessing research of digital humanities is focused on sustainability. Why is sustainability important, and why are guidelines necessary to promote sustainability? How can a field become unsustainable without guidelines? I considered first the actual content of the work in regards to this question. I was thinking that sustainability meant that the author considered enough sources in order to build their argument to withstand the test of time. Like, if new information emerged, then their argument wasn't necessarily refuted or negated by the new information that was then available. And then as more of our classmates talked about sustainability, they pointed to the actual userability of the digital interface of the project itself. It had a lot to do with the sustainability of code and what it meant for software to be able to be accessed years after it was made. Zane said something interesting where it was like, you would think that once something is on the internet, it's on there forever, but that's not necessarily always the case. Dr. Wright, your last task, or almost the last task for this class, was to create a set of standards and then discuss them with our classmates. So I couldn't be a part of the breakout room, but I did think of 4 different phrases or words for a set of standards, and they were originality, arguability, it had service orientation, and usability. Now, one that Madison brought up that her group said was innovation and like challenge. She was talking about how her group wanted a guideline to talk about intellectually new and refreshing news. Dr. Wright, you referred to that as novelty in order to create new knowledge, and that's what I was thinking originality would spin off of, like how original are the ideas that an author is trying to portray. The arguability has to do with its credibility when it in terms of citing sources and the work being usable at all. Because if an author is if an author is supposed to defend its work, then it needs to be able to show its credibility and let it speak for itself. I was thinking that service orientation in terms of why the project was made, what can it be used for, what the knowledge can be used for in terms of serving our community. Like if an author has a project, then they explicitly state what this project's information can be used for in terms of realizing and making a real impact on the present day community with whatever authorship or scholarship that they created. And usable platforming was my fourth one, and many of my other classmates also talked about the repairability of the platform, and that's what I was thinking about when I wrote usable platforming, like usability, because if it's not able to be used, then it's of no value. A project cannot be assessed if it's not even able to be accessed. Now, I just finished this week's reflection paper, so I created my own standards, and I'm excited to see the map of the slave revolt, or the discussion for the map of the slave revolt in Jamaica in week number 7. So thank you so much for listening to my reflection, and I hope you all have a great week.